is a glorious day, isn't it? I've got the best view of anybody in the place, is looking right down there out to the mountains. It's glorious, and there's just a sprinkling of snow on top of the Rumapaka Hills. It's quite extraordinary, which is what that chill in your bones is, John. It's that, young lad here from Sydney town. It's called snow. I remember my Auntie Joan's wedding really well. Auntie Joan was a beautiful, big Irish woman. In fact, in our family, we used to call anything really big Joan-normous. She really was bigger than life in so many different ways. And I remember the day she got married so well. She married my Uncle John, who was also an Irishman from County Clare, and they got married at Eden Park. And I'm not kidding, at that wedding there must have been every Irish Catholic in Auckland was at the wedding. It was November 22, 1963. And in the middle of the wedding, the news came from Dallas that President John Fitzgerald Kennedy had been assassinated. And at an Irish Catholic wedding, there was just this murmur that ran through. I was 4 years old. You're thinking, it can't possibly be that old. Was he even alive in 1963? But yes, I was. I've been in a time warp ever since. But the extraordinary thing about it, even as a 4-year-old, I knew that the world had changed. I could see it in my family. I could see it in the tears. In fact, the story goes that they got one of those big tankers of beer for all the people there, and they drank it within an hour of the news of John Kennedy's death. And my father apparently said that day, that's what they do to Irish Catholics. They kill them. I don't know if that's true, but that was what ran through the family, and it was one of those sort of big days in my life. I remember December the 8th, 1980. And I remember where I was. You know those days in your life where you know where you were when certain things in history happens? I was working in a German beer hall in Auckland as a wine waiter. And I arrived to work, and a friend came up to me and said, John Lennon's just been killed. And I thought, how could John Lennon die? How could that happen to imagination? To the possibilities of everything that was John Lennon. The day the music died, I remember the day so clearly. I remember all sorts of other days. February 22nd, 2011, Ginny remembers the day better than I do. It's a day carved in so many memories. I was supposed to be in Christchurch that day, and a friend of mine rang me at 10 to 1. Stephen, my mate, who works with me in Everyday Theatre, and said, left a message, and I rang him back, and he said, oh, just a moment, there's a lot of building here and a lot of reconstruction in Cashiel Mall. I'll just move away from the buildings. And all I heard was the word quake, and the phone went dead silent, and we waited for 4 hours before we heard again from Stephen. And he was fine, and not everyone was fine, but I know that my life changed that day in ways hard to imagine in the lives of many of us in the city. And of course, this year we had another day that's forever etched into the history of who we are as a nation. March 15, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I was looking after my granddaughter while my daughter slept. She hadn't slept much the night before. And I had little Marley in my hands, and my daughter came out and she said, something's going on in Christchurch, Dad. I was like, another earthquake. What is it this time? And then as the news unfolded, and we attempted to then make sense as individuals, as a nation, as to what had happened as part of our history, I became increasingly convinced of the importance of the arts as a response. And in particular, the response of us as drama teachers. What would it be that we would do? And my heart went out to those teachers in Christchurch who were locked down with their children until at least 6 o'clock that night. You know, if you've been in the eastern suburbs of Christchurch, you know the high levels of anxiety that ripples through those schools, especially with those little 11 and 12-year-olds, the pre-verbals, the ones who'd been in the earthquake, didn't have the language then and are still struggling to find a language to make sense of it now, and then locked down again. And thinking that they'd be going to school on Monday morning. And what would be happening in school on the Monday morning? What would be the role for teachers? You know, would they have to put aside yet again their own troubles, their own worries, their own concerns, their own needs for the children who sit in front of them? And what was the place for the arts? Because one of the things I understand or know is that it's to the arts that we go to make sense of the world when it's tipped on its head. True? That's the place. So when people say, why are the arts important, why is drama important, it's the place that we automatically go to make sense of who we are and to imagine who we might become. It's a simple process that we understand. You know, I've already talked of my granddaughter. She's 9 months old, and I know when she's about 2 or 3, she'll begin to need to work out who her mum is. True? How many here have got little ones in their house or in their families and know? And the amazing thing about it is that when they need to understand the most important person in their life, their mother, how's the way in which they do that? They don't Google the word mum. They don't do an inquiry method. They might do a mental bib, I'm not too sure, but they take a mental. They actually do take a mental. They embody that. Kia ora, George. I thought it was me there for a second, which would have been really embarrassing. What they do is really simple, isn't it? To know who their mum is, they go into her room, they go into her wardrobe, and they take her shoes out, her slippers out, put them on and walk in them. That's what we do in drama, isn't it? We walk in other people's shoes, but it's not something that's made up by theatre makers. It's part of who we are as human beings. To understand, know and explain to ourselves the world. We create fictional worlds. We take the roles of others. And what we do is we do it with our whole body. What's really fascinates me about the whole business of when 2-year-olds are working out their mum, their relationship with their mum as well, what it would be like to be their mum, they don't just put the shoes on, they walk in them. They move in them. And that's what we do in drama too, isn't it? We move. We're one of the few subjects left in schools where kids move. It's extraordinary, isn't it? Most of the rest of the time, they're just sitting. The other thing, of course, you know, in drama is that we're using all our senses. And most of the time in schools, kids only use half of one, listening. So this business of what might the arts do when the world tips on its head, literally after the earthquakes, or in the way it tipped on its head on March 15. What's our response as educators? You know, we have a futures-focused curriculum, don't we, in New Zealand? It drives me bonkers. Because where the future's hard to imagine, what you actually need is a curriculum which is today-focused, making sense of now, not some notion that we have to prepare for a future which is hard to even imagine when the present is barely enough to survive. So what's the response? On the Saturday night, so the attack, as we all remember, was on the Friday. On the Saturday night, my wife and I went to a concert in the town hall. It was a concert of Māori singers and performers. It was all in Te Reo. And we were there. And it started, the kaumātua came out, karakia, a kind of a cleansing across this group of people who had not come because of Christchurch and what had happened, but were there as New Zealanders in this place. to hear music. And he invited us to sing. And we sung Whakaria Mai, New Zealand's national hymn. And there was 1,000 of us in the town hall singing. The next morning I wrote this for the Herald. Last night I stood in the Auckland Town Hall with 1,000 others. We sang Whakaria Mai. And we started tentatively, especially us Pākehā. Oh, I think I know that one. Listening, though, carefully to each other. And we found ways to weave our own voice, our own story into the wider song. It's a great metaphor for the arts, isn't it? The communal nature of its healing. That you find your own voice, but then you have to sing with others. It's a great story for how we might heal and survive as a nation. How you find your own voice, be strong in it, and in the strength of your own voice be able to sing alongside others. The waiata connected us together in the room. It's one of the great purposes of the arts, isn't it? Of theatre. It's communal. We do it together. We make theatre together. Audience, spectator. Sometimes audience and spectator, audience and actor, all in the same person if we're doing process drama or other forms of those kinds of ways of working. The waiata connected us together in the room, and then somehow it felt as if it was connecting us to the people of Christchurch and the people across the country. And that's the other extraordinary thing about the arts, isn't it? It connects us to something beyond ourselves as mere flesh. It connects us in the same way that when you look out across that view to something far bigger and grander than Shakespeare talked about that. There's more to life than mere metaphysics, isn't there? We understand that as theatre makers, that we connect beyond ourselves. We connect to others in the room that we work with, but somehow to something bigger and bolder. In the soaring chorus, as we grew louder and more confident, our singing became a bridge to possibility. Our song was a cry of faith and hope. In its communally created beauty, it was an act of defiance against the ugliness of terror. And that's the possibility inherent in arts making. It gives us, as individuals and communities, the strength to imagine afresh. To see the world again as a place where hope might dwell. It gives us the possibility of connecting to others across time and space and beyond life itself. We'll talk about it in a moment. One of the great strengths and power of the arts and theatre in particular is the way in which it brings the dead back. Those who have gone before us come back in the arts. We don't lose them completely. They remain with us in the power of the theatre that we make. Through the arts as a nation, I wrote, we will remember, mourn, come together and rebuild who we are. And if you reflect back on the 6 months since March 15 or the 7 months, it's exactly what we've done. Through dance, through song, through kapahaka, through a multitude of different ways, we've used the arts to do that work for us, because that's what the arts are there to enable us to do those things. The arts will be the way we resist and claim back the spirit of who and what we might be as a nation. In the same way we did last night, through different art forms, we will find ways to deeply listen to each other and to find new ways to breathe in harmony. So the importance of drama class in the weeks and months that have followed since March 15, have they become ways for us to listen more deeply to each other? Because because that's what we needed to do, and we continue to need to do as a nation, to continue to listen to each other more deeply and to breathe differently in harmony with each other. Those, it seems to me, to be the challenges. The terrorist attacks, I argue, deliberately make the world unbearably ugly. Terrorism works by making the world ugly. What do we do when we make theatre in our classrooms? We create moments of joy and wonder and beauty. That is a deeply political act. At a time when in history there are huge forces to dehumanize who we are, to strip away our humanity from us, and nothing does that more drastically than acts of terror, to reduce humans to collateral, to do that through acts deliberately ugly. The response to that, which lies in our hands as theatre makers, as artists, as ones working with young people, the political response to that is to make things of beauty, of wonder, of joy, that bridge again between us as people, that reminds us of who we are. Paulo Freire, when asked what the purpose of education was, said, to make humans more fully human. Simple. Why do we teach? Why do we have kids in schools? It's not to prepare them for a capitalist system which strips them of their humanity. That's someone else can do that. It's not why I'm in school. My purpose for being in school, why I even survive in the dehumanizing factory of a university, is to make humans more fully human. Not to make them happy, but to make them more fully human. And drama sits at the very heart of that, doesn't it? It's how as young ones, as 2 and 3-year-olds, they come to know and understand and make sense of the world, and that's what you continue, that tradition, that way of thinking and knowing in classrooms. I ended up on the Sunday afternoon, Lynn Freeman, who runs the arts program on National Radio, asked if I would talk about what schools might do, because she was aware of the work that I've been doing in a range of different places for nearly 40 years now. So I told you, back to John Kennedy's assassination at Batesman. And I went on the radio and I talked about the importance for teachers not to return to normal. Because that was all the advice from the psychologists. And I understand the normality in terms of routine. And that's really important. But the world had shifted, hadn't it? It had changed for all of us, especially our fellow Muslim citizens. I'm feeling it in a very different way to me as a Pākehā man in Auckland. But it was different. And again, I looked at the Ministry of Education website, and unless you were being diagnosed as traumatised, there was no advice. Nothing. Just a huge vacuum as usual. You know, from that place, nothing to suggest what I might do as a teacher. What would I do with the children who'd been locked in with me till 6 o'clock at night on the Friday? Not requiring psychological assistance, but needing something from their teacher, some way of making sense of what had happened. And what was the possibility for the arts, for us as drama teachers, as those of us who were working in there? I gave this talk for 20 minutes on the radio, and then I was in Dunedin a week later doing some other work, and a woman who was a public health nurse came up to me and she said, "Thank you for that talk you gave on national radio on Sunday. We've been sending it out to teachers so that they'd have an idea what to do." And I thought, how extraordinary is that? And it speaks, of course, of the marginalisation of the arts in our schools. Because the obvious place was us, wasn't it? It would seem to me, when the world's tipped on its head, arts have a particular place. Turning the page. I wondered what I'd do. Where I'd work, a PhD student of mine was in the Hawke's Bay with Juliet. She'd started a process drama work that John knows well. It's based on the picture book Home and Away, which is part of school drama. And it tells the story of, and I used it at Vid's conference on the mantle in Waikato about 3 years ago. And in that, she was creating workshops around how you use process drama to address the rise of fascism, new nationalisms, the kinds of never-ending attack on refugees and migrants which litters Western democracies all over the world, which is a threat to humanity at a scale which is hard to imagine. And so she was working on that, and she was on that Saturday due to give her first workshop in the Hawke's Bay. Moy is a German PhD student of mine, and felt she couldn't do it because of what it meant for her, the difficulties of doing that work, but she's been doing that work since. And really importantly, so there's another place in there in terms of drama and what's important, and that kind of pre-work. What work are we doing around these important issues in our classrooms? Just a question that's sort of dropped in there for us to think about. The issue of our times, in so many different ways, the issue of our times. How do we live with each other? And what is it that drama might offer us in answering that question? I thought a great deal about what it would be that I could do, and like many of us. Drama is a bridge to the past. How would drama be used in Christchurch to remember, to mourn, to grieve, to celebrate the lives of those who'd gone? And how was that used in schools? How were you involved as a theatre maker in that process? And if you weren't, why weren't you involved? Who took that over? Why was it different in every school? Not saying it had to be a uniform response, but was it left to individual people who thought maybe we could or should do this, and who knew what was the right way of working? Huge questions. So bridge to the past, but I was also thinking about John Dewey. I think a lot about John Dewey. He was an education philosopher. Murray's a great fan of John Dewey as well. John Dewey understood the importance of the arts, the imagination, and democracy. Over 100 years ago, can you imagine it? He understood that you made democracy with your hands. It was an act of making, not just something in your head. You made it in with your body. And he understood that the arts were centrally important to the preservation of democracy because the arts train the imagination. So why do we teach drama? John Dewey would say you need drama in schools because it trains the imagination. Why is it important for young people to have their imagination and have it trained and ready to go? Because without imagination, you can't hope for a better world. It's that simple. It's the beginning of, isn't it? Possibility. And possibility resides in the imagination. And how do you train that imagination with our young ones? You give them the arts. It's why they're so vital in primary schools. How do 2 and 3-year-olds train their imagination? They make marks on pieces of paper. They dance, they sing, they create imagined worlds. And they deserve the opportunity to do that when they come to school, don't they? Don't listen to John Hattie and all that stuff. So, it's really important, isn't it? It's really important that there's another way of being in schools. And the way in which we work in drama, we understand that. We're training the imagination, not so that they can be actors on a stage, but actors on the world, with the world, for the world. That's a big difference, isn't it? We don't need more young people seeing themselves as merely spectators to the lives in which they lead. You know how that feels, don't you? Sometimes I feel like I'm just a spectator. All this stuff just dumping in on top of me, and I have no sense of agency. I'm a professor at a university. I'm a white, older male now. I should have so much power and agency. What must it be like at 12? To be reduced to a spectator constantly with no sense that you can act. Well, we do something in drama. We train actors, don't we? But what kind of actors? Critical, creative citizens. And that's what Dewey understood. If you have creative, critical citizens, that protects democracy. People who don't just answer questions, but question answers. Are smart enough not just to read the instructions by their boss, but to challenge and question the instructions by their bosses. Those are the kinds of citizens we need to keep democracy alive. It's not a new concept, is it? But it's one that's been buried in an avalanche of neoliberal reforms, centering on literacy and numeracy and everything else that can kill creativity and the imagination. Those are the schools in which most of us work. It's the university in which I work, because it's worked right across the entire education system, from early childhood all the way through. So we understand that, the importance of training the imagination. The other thing which is so vitally important, of course, is if we bridge to the past through the arts and we bridge to the future, we also bridge from the solo lives that we lead as individuals to be with others. And the importance of that, the constant attack in the Western media, from Trump to Scott Morrison to, sorry, John.
I'm sorry.
Australia, to Australia's Trump. That's what they call him now, Australia's Trump, my God. You know, and we could go on, couldn't we? Yeah. To the rise of new nationalisms across Europe, to Bolsonaro in Brazil, the demonizing of the other, the culture clashes. And what do we understand about the importance of theatre making? It's a social art form at its heart. It teaches us to imagine not just by ourselves, but imagine with others. Isn't that extraordinary? To make with others, to make other worlds with others, to imagine our lives differently with others. And in doing that, understand more deeply others, to listen more deeply, as we did in the town hall, to whakaria mai. I remember, I don't sing very well. Anyone who's ever heard me sing will attest to that. But I sang beautifully that night. Because I was drowned by 1,000 others who carried my voice. My wife was like this, you know, but she wasn't actually, because we were, you know, it brought tears as well. We cried as a community together. Those things are vital for us as people, aren't they? And that's what the arts have to offer. I mean, you know, people say, you know, what? Why the arts? It's like, God almighty, I have to tell you about what it is to be human, but I will, if that's what it takes. So the importance of bridging beyond ourselves. You know, after September 11, which was Ian McEwan, the great novelist, wrote this about the importance of imagining the other. Imagining what it is to be someone other than yourself. is at the core of our humanity. It is the essence of compassion, and it is the beginning of morality. You know, there's a lot of people trucking around the place talking about the 4 C's of this and the 4 C's of that, and you need creativity and whatever. You know the most important thing we need? Compassion. And there's something extraordinary about the capacity of the arts when we train the imagination and we link it with empathy. It's a mighty powerful force. The business of compassion. Where does that sit in our schools? Suddenly I'm thinking to myself, God, drama teachers will be incredibly busy this week. But we're busy all the time, aren't we? Of course, what happened on March 15 is just not just. It's a metaphor for the terror that strikes at the hearts of young people all over New Zealand all the time. You know, living in the 21st century is not about developing 21st century learning skills. It's kind of like survival stuff for many of our young people, isn't it? And what's the place for theatre and drama in there? It's enormous, isn't it? So the question really is, in many ways, so why is the arts and drama being so marginalised in our schools? Why aren't there hundreds of people doing this course? Why isn't the arts and drama flourishing? Martha Nussbaum, who some of you might know, wrote an extraordinary book, The Arts and Democracy. She argues that it's a deliberate attack on democracy by our curriculum makers. And she argues that the arts haven't disappeared by chance. They haven't just kind of, oh, we forgot to do them. It's deliberate government policy. It's deliberate government policy that there are other kinds of people that they see schools should be making. Workers for the future, compliant, obedient, people who can follow instructions, who can read functionally but not critically or creatively. That's been its purpose, you know. It's about individual achievement. Well, it used to, I mean, the former National Party ministers talked about it endlessly. School is about individual achievement, not about communal well-being, not about becoming more fully human. None of those things were in the notions of what it was to be a successful school. And we drove through that, and as we drove through it, the biggest and most conspicuous casualty in my mind were the arts, and in particular dance and drama. It just kind of fell off the edge. So it's hugely encouraging to see this work over the next 2 days, which says, yeah, I know, but we have another story to tell. That's the other role of the arts, isn't it? To tell counter stories. Not to just buy into the dominant narrative, which is this is what school's supposed to be. Most of you, if you are teaching drama in schools, are somewhat suspect. Are you not? You are doing something, unless you're really lucky like in this school with Charles, you are doing stuff which is not in the mainstream, not in the ordinary ways of being or working in schools. And that gives you strength and passion, but it also makes you margin dwellers, strengths and possibilities in it. I wondered what would happen in Christchurch. I got a phone call from a colleague and friend of both Ginny and mine, Alice Hill. I don't know if people know Alice. She's an extraordinary teacher. Works for Zen Zen Zone. Now there's a company if you're looking at physical theatre work to do in your classrooms. And she rang and she said, Peter, I don't know what to do. I'm working in Hagley High School on a Tuesday night with 2 groups of young people who are mainly refugee and migrant children. And she said, what do we do? Alice is a great teacher and I knew she knew what to do. But I said, oh, well, I could come down. So I've been going down, I think I've gone down about half a dozen times on a Tuesday night. If you catch a 2 o'clock, fly back on the 10, you can do it for about $80 if you get the tickets right. So it wasn't too bad. So that's what I did. I went down to Hagley about a week after the terror attack, and Alice was working with two groups. I just want to talk very briefly about two and what the possibilities I thought were for using drama with those particular groups. She was working with a young group of Muslim women, aged between 12 and 16. It was a really tough time, 10 days after the attack at Hagley. Hagley High had been used as the coordinating centre for the response. So it was a community where there was still huge amounts of mumai, huge amounts of grief rolling through the community. The girls wanted to make a dance with Alice. What would a dance be about? And they said what they would like to make a dance about was the wearing of the hijab. And there were three parts of that they wanted to construct a dance about. One was that the cloth that is used is light. It's a light, delicate cloth. And yet when you wear it, it's heavy. So they wanted to make a piece of work around the tension between the lightness of the material and the weight of it. It's an extraordinary notion, isn't it? And they wanted to make a dance about what it was to wear the hijab when it made you a target. And they wanted to use dance as a way, not just, and I hate this when they say the arts are around expressing. It is around expression, but it's a way of thinking. It's a way of thinking with your body, of moving in through your body as a way of thinking about the world, of making sense of the world. What an extraordinary gift that Alice was giving those young women. The chance to make sense. I don't know if it's possible to even make sense of that. But a chance to think about in their bodies, not just with their heads, but in their bodies together, to imagine together, to make something together, to make with their bodies democracy, citizenship, to make something. I don't know if that dance will ever be shared. And who would it be shared with? Is that important? The importance is the making, is the work that they are doing together, it seemed to me. And then, because I always seem to end up with the little ones, I ended up in a room with the 6 and 7-year-olds. These amazing kids. And they were all sort of sitting in there, and I just sort of flowing down, and like, oh, what am I going to do? And Alice said, oh, they're yours. I went, sweet. Anyway, we talked about all sorts of things. Usually I get kids to warm up their imaginations first. So I got them to warm, and I got really confused because I was kind of like, and I was a bit thrown, more than a bit. It was kind of like, holy crap! I've worked in prisons, psychiatric hospitals. I've worked in earthquake zones and done everything, and then now I'm in this place, and I'm just the feeling in the place was so intense, especially like. I think sometimes if you, like when you fly in and you're in that space and then you fly out, the disconnect's so enormous. And I went, let's rub our hands together. And I was going to get them to rub and warm up their imagination, which is they have to find on their bodies. It's an old Carol Miller, Juliana Saxton trick. It's gorgeous, eh? You know, kids put it on their heads and warm it up with their hands. When I worked in earthquake zones in Mexico, they used to warm up their imaginations in their tummies. And I went, let's warm up. Oh, and I went, so what do you need to warm up if you're doing drama? And this lovely 7-year-old went, belief. Cool. Mine. Shared with you all now, so rather than just warming up your imagination, you can warm up your belief. So we warmed up our belief, and I said to them, you know, the great thing about drama is that you can imagine anything that you want to be. So what should we imagine that we could do? And they said, we could imagine we could be superheroes. Cool thing to be, isn't it? If you're a recent refugee migrant in Christchurch, what would you like to be? A superhero. What kinds of superhero qualities do you think you'd like to have? We could fly. So we had great fun. I remember Alice looking at me and going, how the hell is he going to get all these kids to fly? Well, it's really easy when you're 6 and 7, isn't it? It's so easy to imagine yourself flying. And we flew around the room. We had a great deal of fun. We crashed into things. We did all sorts of stuff. Sat down. We were all pretty excited about that. Any other qualities? We could make ourselves invisible. And I wondered about that on a range of different levels, isn't it? Why would you want to make yourself invisible? So I said, okay, you could be invisible. Mums were watching. Why don't you become an invisible superhero, and then you can be as rude as you like to your mum in front of her, and she won't be able to see you. So that was great fun, wasn't it? So there was this whole business. So mums had to pretend they couldn't see. The little ones had to work out how far they could push that. True, right? Great tension. You know, we talk about tension and drama. You could see some mums going, oh, I think you're just about to cross the line, and they were negotiating and working. But there was this other wonderful thing that started to happen in the room. We started to laugh. You know, like there'd just been this, and that's the other importance of drama in the arts. You know, like there are two faces, aren't there, in the Greek masks? And one of them is laughter. And that's one of the other great things. We mourn those who've gone, but, you know, and in the mihi whakato, right all the way back there, you know, we talk about farewelling the dead, and then we acknowledge the living. And one of the ways in which we acknowledge the living, I think in particular, in drama, is that we laugh together. Joe Winston writes about that beautifully, if you've read Joe's work. The importance of laughter in the drama classroom. And we laughed together and we played together. And then I was thinking, there was all this stuff coming out from our Prime Minister. And I said, there's one other quality that you could use. The superhero quality of kindness. And I thought that was a great idea. So what you can now do is you can practice being kind to your parents. And kind to each other. So there were these lovely conversations. My favourite was there was a dad in the room, and this one little boy went up to him and went, "You're quite good looking." So, you know, like there was also sort of like an honesty sort of flown over it as well, which I thought was pretty cool. We sat together at the end, and then we planned. I said I'd come back, and Alice and I would do a drama together, and we'd make a plan about what we'd do. So I said to them, so when I come back next week, what would you like to do a drama about? And they looked at me, and they looked at Alice, and one little girl said, we could make a drama about Alice in Wonderland. And I said, oh, that would be really cool. Why would that be a useful thing to do? Why would you want to? I'm better at asking questions than that. Honest. Sometimes. I said, why would you want to make it? You know, what would that be about? Well, Wonderland's a place that you go to where they promise it's wonderful. These are recent refugees and migrants in Christchurch. It's a place where they tell you it's wonderful. It's promised to be wonderful. But when you get to Wonderland, you don't understand the rules. And 3, there's a Queen of Hearts who wants to take your head off. The importance of fictional worlds to understand our real worlds. The capacity for children to use metaphor. The importance for them to find those metaphors, those fictional frames, to distance from the real world, stepping in like they do into their mother's shoes, so that they might better understand that they live in a land where they were promised something, they don't understand the rules, and now there's a queen who wants to take their heads off. So the work that I did and Alice did was around how you negotiate with a queen who wants to take your head off. It's big work when you're 7 and 8, isn't it? Especially when Alice plays the queen and role. And you have people in her court who advise the queen not to show any kindness because it means weakness. When you have the 8-year-olds who are arguing with in that kind of in-role work whether or not kindness is a good thing. So in concluding, oh yeah, look at that, not even time for questions, maybe one or two. In concluding, the importance of drama for citizenship, for democracy, comes down to a set of 2 questions that I was asked that's guided much of my work for the last 15 years, I think. I was the national coordinator for drama back at the turn of this century when the arts, I know it's scary, Ginny, isn't it? When the arts were made a compulsory part of the New Zealand curriculum. Glory days, I think Bruce Springsteen would have sung. But I was in England and I was sitting next to Dorothy Heathcote. Dorothy knew that I was, because I told her, not because she knew, but I told her that I was the national drama facilitator and we were putting drama into New Zealand schools. And she didn't ask me about drama, she asked me these 2 questions. So, in New Zealand schools, do children do things that matter? Shit, that woman could ask questions. Do children in New Zealand schools do things that matter? So my suggestion to you is if you have that in the front of your head on your first day back at term, are you doing things that matter? It's a hell of a question. I do a lot of stuff at the University of Auckland that doesn't matter a bean. I know that and I live with it, but I sneak in whenever I possibly can moments of stuff that truly, truly matter. Vital. It's vital for democracy. It's vital that theatre is a forum, a place to talk about the things that truly matter, and not just talk, but to move, to act with others. It's her follow-up question. Do children in New Zealand schools do things that matter? And in doing that, do they realise they matter too? Huge questions, aren't they? And do they realise they matter too? That's vital. That's the vital work of your life in classrooms, and I hope it's the vital work that you'll do over these next 2 days. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you very much.